In 2024, we're going to have a general election. Which political party will sort out the housing crisis in the UK? Today, I'd like to firstly go to Russell Quirk, who is right-leaning in his point of view.
Yeah, unaccustomed as I am to talking about such things from a political perspective. Well, look, it won't be the Conservatives, will it? So the Conservatives have had 14 years in office, and look, before we can kind of park the relative disaster that they've overseen in many respects, and I say that as a former Conservative voter, but they've had 14 years to fix the broken housing market in terms of ensuring adequate supply. They have not done so. You'll start to see over the next few weeks a whole bunch of gaslighting around the little bits and pieces that they have done that are semblances of success. So what we will end up with, I think inevitably, I think we will accept this, is a Labour government towards the end of this year who are already making noises, and actually some of them quite interesting and I would argue probably quite sensible, would you believe, from me? Yes, I know. With regard to how we begin to tackle the housing crisis. So let's be clear about what we talk about when we reference the housing crisis. The housing crisis is the fact that there aren't enough homes being built. The deficit is something like 100,000 homes per annum. So we build about 200,000 a year. We should build about 300,000 a year. And that seems to be the kind of the expert consensus in terms of what we need. And that 300,000 is a combination of resale homes, so homes that need to be sold to people, but also social housing, affordable housing, and so on. Now, about 6% of Britain is built on from a residential perspective. So the fallacy that Britain is full and that we are building over lots and lots of green fields and so on, I mean, it really is for the birds. It's completely incorrect.
And those figures are correct, by the way.
Yeah. Do we have a planning system that is broken? Yeah, largely we do. That's not the problem. The problem we have is twofold. On the one hand, we have politicians actually of all flavours, not just the Conservatives, because Labour weren't that much better up until 2010. Politicians that as chancellors, prime ministers and housing secretaries like to make noise and headlines around housing solutions because it suits them to get the credit. Unfortunately, politicians like us all are, pretty self-righteous. We like to get the credit for things. And as a consequence, therefore, politicians tend to look at the housing market as a headline grabbing exercise. And then, of course, through the revolving door of the Treasury or the housing department or Downing Street, as we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years in particular, those people then leave. And of course, they don't then get to fulfill the solution that they printed across the Daily Mirror, the Express, the Mail or whatever. So we have a short-term view that I would argue is almost blighted on the basis that politicians play fast and loose with political headlines around housing. They use it as a political football. That's the first problem. But it means nothing ever gets solved. The second issue is the house builders. Now, about 80% of all homes that are built in Britain are built by just 10 companies. So the big ones, right? The likes of Persimmon, Bovis, Bellway, and so on. Now, as a free market capitalist, I'll say this. There is nothing wrong with those 10 house builders being at the behest of their shareholders. That's what they're there to do. They're not there for society, unfortunately. They exist to build homes and to make a profit. And their shareholders, therefore their boards, insist that they do that in the most commercially efficient way possible. That's a problem, because what a house builder wants in terms of output and maximising the value of every plot that's built does not necessarily accord, rarely does accord, with what society needs in terms of the right homes built in the right places at the right time. So you've got those two problems. The way round that is to circumvent the politicians. So you take the short-term decision-making away from politicians, and you also take the output, the bottleneck, away from the house builders, right? How do you do that? Simon Well's going to like this because it's going to sound a bit socialist, but it's not. What you have to do is look at all of the brownfield land that exists that's owned by local authorities and government. There's about 180,000 hectares of land owned by the public sector across Britain. Think of the Ministry of Defence, think of NHS, think of wasteland near railway lines, and so on and so on. In local authorities in particular, there is an abundance of this stuff. I mean hundreds of thousands of hectares of this wasteland. If we could join the dots whereby the land that the public already own could become the stock that gets built on in the right areas, but built for society in terms of the demand in those areas, either for people wanting to purchase, or indeed for the social housing waiting list or for affordable homes. Join those dots, you solve the housing crisis. But you can't leave it to politicians because they're in the way, and you can't leave it to the house builders because their shareholders are saying, hang on, Simon, I know that you have 100,000 unused plots of land in your persimmon land bank, but of course we don't want to flood the market with those in a year or two because that will drive prices down. So you have to go out. So what I propose is the launching of a national house building corporation almost, which is run by property people, but with the public as shareholders. They then have I know you're going to like this, Simon, I told you, and you then have a 10-year strategy that is signed off at the beginning by government, civil servants and the shareholders, and then you let that board of directors get on with it unopposed for 10 years. In 10 years, that solves the UK housing crisis, I promise you.
Russell, you sound like a politician, if you don't mind me saying. I've just done some back of the pack.
No, I'm the opposite.
Okay, well, let's just see this. Let's assume you've got no land. An average house is 1,000 square foot, and to build a house at the moment, it's £250 a square foot in pure materials. Yeah. Okay, which means 100,000 homes is going to cost £250 billion a year. Yeah. The NHS only costs 181. Where are you getting your cash from?
Well, you're going to sell some of the houses for resale. Problem solved. So let's say you've got an area that needs housing. You build 50 houses for resale, so you make a profit on those houses, and the other 50, or whatever the proportion is social housing and affordable. They're the ones that are subsidised, but the profit that is made, like Persimmon make, like Bovis, like Bellway make, out of the 50 that you sell, funds the social housing. Job done.
Not going to pay for all of it.
It does.
Simon?
It does.
So I'll take that point on second, but I think I like the idea of a national house building corporation. I think it's an extremely good idea. I think the one thing you will still run against, and I would add to that an additional solution I would bring to bear on it, is one of the problems we have is I'm not a fan of blaming NIMBYs, not in my backyard, or bananas build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone, the bananas as we call them, because they're not really a problem. A government can create a regime where that happens. But I think rather than setting up corporation against developer, against landlord, against tenant, against home buyer, I'm a huge fan, I know this is in the Labour's manifesto, because they are going to be the next government with some considerable majority, is citizens' assemblies. I believe you bring the right people together, you remove the politicians, take the politicians out of it, and when you have a planning issue, you basically get the citizens together and say, look, we do need to build houses for the next generation. But if we collectively debate the issues and understand the benefits, have experts talk about what the implications of not building houses with the right level of infrastructure or not building houses happens to the children of the people who already own houses, as they proved in Ireland over the very, very difficult issue over abortion, a citizens' assembly is a very, very good way of addressing a complicated issue.
But what you're describing is a planning committee which already exists. And the problem is that those people that are elected to make those decisions are scared witless.
A citizens' assembly is not elected. It is randomly selected.
So you take democracy out of it altogether.
They are democratic in the sense it's like a bureaucracy. We allow it to settle court cases. We trust our entire legal system over to randomly selected people, decide if you go to jail or not.
But now, with a judge presiding.
With a judge presiding. And also, their job will still be to make a recommendation. But once you have the body of opinion of a citizens' assembly, it is very hard for elected politicians to turn them down. If we say, passionately disagree.
But you're talking about planning level. I don't think that's the problem. The problem is, even if that were to happen in terms of citizens' assemblies replacing planning committees effectively, who are you still going to get to provide the land and build the houses? The only way to do it is the way I'm suggesting, because you can't allow, I'm afraid, I hate to say the free market won't allow it.
You will never get an elected government say you've got 10 years to do what the hell you want. No elected government would ever do.
Then we're not serious about solving the housing
crisis.
Whereas
if you put a citizens' assembly as a mechanism there to represent the rights of the people, you solve that problem. So basically what you do is you have the benefit of your idea, but you maintain the public say in that process, thus meaning we're much more aligned between the public.
The land sourcing is the problem, and the timing of building those homes is the problem.
Simon Well.
Thank you, Fiona Bruce, for giving Russell 45 minutes to talk, as usual. Come to the Lib Dem, half a minute.
I am the expert. I am the expert.
It's going to really surprise you. I agree with almost everything you actually just said there. I genuinely think, apart from where the blame is, because I don't know why we're having this conversation, because of course everything's been levelled up, so we're all good. Yeah. So, no problems there. But actually, you're right. Labour were not much better in terms of everything. This is endemic of, as you just said, the house builders just exactly the same. I know I mentioned it before as well, the water companies as well. As soon as you give that unfettered shareholder focus, this is going to inevitably happen there. So you do have to take out of it. And I think that's exactly the right model. And is, you know, to take it to the wider political thing, needs to be done for things like transport. You wouldn't have had the nightmare of HS2 and everything else if you'd had this policy in place. So I absolutely agree with you. I think it's the right thing to do.
But you still need a democratic check and control.
Look, genuinely, however, you know, I think that's the detail, but I think to take it outside of just this short-termism of 5-year things is just it's just ludicrous. And one thing I would just disagree with as well is we're going to be best at handling housing, and the wider market is here. It doesn't really matter who gets in next anyway. That release of tension and everything else there, and the optimism is going to drive stuff going forwards, even how difficult it's going forwards.
Yeah, I think I agree again with most things everyone said. I think to show how serious the government takes housing at the minute, it takes longer to complete on a property at the minute than the average tenure of the last 15 housing ministers. So
it's just contemptible.
So their average tenure is less than from the time from sale agreed to completion, which is a joke. How you can't get anything agreed in that
Which
time.
is what, 5 months, 6 months?
Which is 120 to 130 days. So how can you get anything done? There is a housing crisis. We've not touched on lettings too much, but affordability and availability are huge issues.
This is interesting. Rents are 4.8% cheaper in real terms today than they were in 2016.
Thanks to inflation.
No, that's after inflation.
Yeah, no, but only because inflation is so high, that's kind of mitigated some of that impact.
If you're spending 40% of your income on rent, that is unsustainable. That is genuinely unsustainable.
Although it has been sustained.
The average has hardly changed in the last 10 years. It's around 30 to 31%. Hasn't changed if you do average rents and average salaries. Not changed at all.
I don't think that. We need to fact check that.
I can prove those are the facts.
We need a BBC fact checker. Oh, no, we don't. No.
I'm a statistician.
Yeah,
those are the stats. It's just that we've had inflation creep, and it always feels bad now, doesn't it?
And wage increases are running at about 8% right now.
Well, they weren't though. I mean, we actually haven't had pay rises. Actually, in real terms, there's been no pay rises since 2008.
You sound like Mick Lynch.
There have been no pay rises since 2008 in real terms because of inflation.
Well, if any Labour hadn't left the country in the state they left it.
And I do believe, actually, there was a Republican in the White House when it happened. Were they some left-wing people who made it happen in the United States, which caused the entire problem in the first place?
So hang on, you're blaming who? Donald Trump?
Financial deregulation.
George W.
Oh,
Bush.
George W. Bush. You're going back that far, are you? Wow,
Yeah, because
okay.
that's
So
when
I
it
go back quite a long
happened.
way.
It
I blame
happened.
Tony Blair.
And also, every single finance minister in the UK has always left a note to their successor to say, we've got no money left, or some joking comment. The only chancellor in the entire history of this country who's weaponised that note was George Osborne to put in his stupid austerity policy, which was actually economic literacy.
Final thoughts.
So just on house building, so you're right, we've missed our target year after year of about 100,000, but from the kind of reports I've read, I think there's a shortfall of about 4 million homes, because that's added up over the years.
Yes, that's
cumulative. So the problem, we need to build so much more. The other issue that doesn't get talked about a lot, I was at a talk the other day, and when we go to bed tonight, there are 12 million bedrooms unoccupied. Yes. And there's a big problem with an aging population, that people are sat in these big houses and they're not moving and downsizing, and there's 12 million bedrooms that could house people.
There's a term for that, Paul. Bed blockers. They're now talking about the single older people that live in their 4-bed detached house that they've owned for 30 or 40 years. But that's their right. Yeah. Right? That's their right to live in the house that they've bought.
It is, but there's potentially something there that could be done.
There you go. Thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.